So good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Courtney Yaki, and I am with the F&M Regional Growth Alliance, and here today representing the Business Navigator Alliance of South Central and Southeastern Illinois. We have an excellent presentation stored for you. Today, we're diving into the topic of new markets tax credits. The New Markets Tax Credit Program incentivizes community development and economic growth through the use of tax credits that attract private investment to distressed communities. They are designed to create measurable community impacts through job creation, providing access to additional amenities with access to goods and services, and eradicating food deserts. Overall, this program assists businesses with access to financing that is flexible and affordable. We're very fortunate to have an expert with us today, someone with over 40 years of experience in lending and development to help guide us through today's discussion. With us today is Brian Hollenback. Brian's with Central States Development Partners Incorporated in the Economic Growth Corporation. Brian is going to break down what are new market tax credits. He's going to walk us through some case studies and has mapped out the distressed areas throughout our region. But before we get started, what is the Business Navigator Alliance of South Central and Southeastern Illinois? We are a 6-county regional collaboration working through a small business community navigator grant. Off to the side, you can see our partners. We have Angela Griffin with Coles Together, Lori Miner with the Sullivan, Illinois Chamber and Economic Development, Risa Shaner with the Crawford County Development Association, Nora Swalls with the Marshall Area Chamber of Commerce, Bob Colvin and Freddie Smitty with the Paris Economic Development Corporation, and yours truly, Courtney Yaki with the F&M Regional Growth Alliance. This group is charged with professional outreach and technical assistance for local, state, and federal programs. Our mission is to ensure that small businesses in our region are competitive in applying for necessary resources, and our goal is to position you for success by accelerating business recovery and growth. You see the map to the side of your screen is where the Business Navigator Alliance is located. Today's webinar is a part of a series of business webinars we host each month. These webinars are typically scheduled for the last Thursday of each month, so please mark your calendars. If you will, visit www.ilbusinessnavigators.com, that's navigators with an S, and sign up for our newsletter to stay informed. In addition to these webinars, we also host various outreach events, office hours, and offer one-on-one technical assistance. Again, visit ilbusinessnavigators.com to learn more. As a reminder, we will post a recording from today's presentation and additional supportive materials on the website as well. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please put them in the chat. We're going to allow the opportunity for Brian to run through his presentation. Has a lot of information to explain what are new market tax credits, to run through case studies, and going to dive into what the region looks like. And want to provide the ample amount of time for him to be able to run through that information, educate us today. So we're going to hold questions off till the end. But if you have any questions, please throw them in the chat and we'll get to them. And without further ado, Brian Hollenback serves as the president and CEO of Central State Development Partners Incorporated and its controlling entity, the Economic Growth Corporation. With over 4 decades of experience in lending, economic, and real estate development, he has overseen the deployment of more than $1 billion into urban core development projects. Under his leadership, Central States has secured 6 consecutive federal new markets tax credits awards, totaling $220 million, along with $29.3 million in state new markets tax credits awards in Illinois, Kentucky, and Nevada. Since its CDE certification in 2010, Central States has closed a total of $241 million of federal and state new markets tax credits, supporting projects with a total cost of $842 million and creating 12,676 jobs. Hollenback is nationally renowned and actively participates in numerous national boards focused on community and economic development. We're very fortunate to have Mr. Hollenback with us today. Brian, are you ready to present?
I sure am. Thank you. Well, first of all, I appreciate everybody's time today. The greatest gift you could give us this morning is your time, and I'm grateful. Bear with me as I'm going to try to do my best to take a subject matter that probably isn't one of the most exciting things we could be talking about, Its net benefit certainly is, but the project and the process itself, I'll do my best to keep it moving as best as I can and try not to get caught up too much in necessarily of all the details. One of the things that as we go through this, and we're going to go through the history of our organization so that you can see how community-based that we are, some case studies, is I trust that your walk away will be as simple as this. Under the federal allocation, the net benefit conservatively is about 20%, okay, of equity. So on a $10 million transaction, it's $2 million. And because we are fortunate enough in the state of Illinois to also have a state credit, and I'll talk about why that's so important later in the presentation, that's another 10%. So your walkaway is between 20 and 30% of a development project can be provided in the form of equity. The next piece, as you see in the agenda, and these are very important, and these will be more, I guess today you're gonna also get some homework, and that is our polling questions and our community needs assessment. These are not just questions for the purpose of going through an exercise. These are very important to us, and here is why. As we structure our application to the Treasury Department, we identify pipeline projects, and we're also looking to identify specific projects and from your perspective, what you feel your community needs. And this is one of the ways that we can do our best to be able to meet that threshold and be responsive to where the needs are, so we can do our best to partner with you to make something happen. Okay, next slide, please. So economic growth is our controlling entity. We are a minority-controlled nonprofit that's 41 years old. We were birthed initially as a neighborhood revitalization organization, merged with a couple of organizations over the year that was birthed in completing 1 to 2 houses every 18 months. That's grown to an entity that we're looking toward being over about $300 million by the end of this year. We also received in 2016, and I think this really speaks to why we're doing this today, the Congressman Jim Leach Award, which recognizes an outstanding rural nonprofit organization that best promotes fair and equal access to credit, capital, and contributes most in community toward promoting wealth building in traditionally underserved populations. And I think that's a really good explanation of our core mission. Next slide, please. So we are a 501c3, as I indicated. We have Central States Development Partners, which is our national for-profit entity, Growth General Contracting, LLC. As we have been a housing developer of last resort, Growth General Contracting, very similar to that. We don't compete with the private sector. We help facilitate. But on some of these smaller projects, we found a gap in accessing contractors. It's also a key component in our workforce development through our CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution, with contractor capacity building. We also learned early on that if a property is not properly managed, you will leave a community worse off than it was before you developed their housing. And therefore, we created our own property management division of home-based property management. Then our multifamily development, we believe that financial education is very important. We are a HUD-approved housing counseling entity that has 8 different videos that breaks down not only from homeownership, but for example, what goes into a FICO score and why is that important, as well as multifamily, single family development programs. Next slide, please. All right, so to further its mission to benefit underserved communities, Growth formed Central States Development Partners in 2009. We brought in Baker Tilly to meet with our board to discuss how we could access new market tax credits and really continue to provide capital to communities that are typically overlooked or underserved. We were certified by the Treasury Department in 2010. We closed our first transaction in 2012. Which was in Illinois, and it was a rural transaction, so we were proud of that. And then we received our first allocation in 2015, 2016, $45 million. Next slide, please. So it is a coordinated strategy. We really are looking at investing in communities, prioritize transactions that has strong community alignment. Thus, the lead in why we have our polling questions is that we really want to make sure that we stand right beside you. We are aligned with what you're looking to do and to help access that capital. And while predominantly we're real estate financing, that's a form of security, not necessarily just residential components, but we focus on industrial manufacturing that produces high quality jobs and placement with low-income persons within the communities. And we'll get into other uses that we prioritize as well. Next question, please, or next slide, please. So industrial manufacturing, rural and minor metro communities, that's very important to us. And with a real focus as we get into the map, you'll see where we've been making our investments in the state of Illinois. Community-based healthcare, our federally qualified healthcare facilities in rural communities, medically underserved, and then multi-service communities that address social economics. Youth, we're very interested in what we can do with youth, whether it's a variety of through the YMCA or Boys and Girls Club or various centers. And while we don't specifically identify it as a target, since we were birthed in housing, we do like mixed use developments, and you'll see that in the case studies that do provide housing and what restrictions may or may not come with that. Next slide. So why do we do all of this and burn up so many brain cells? We have logged in the number of hours that it takes to submit one of these applications, and it's just under 300 hours. So why would we do that? It's all about jobs. So our impact today, and we do monitor this over a 7-year compliance period with each transaction that we do. You can see the numbers here before you. And I think sometimes we miss how important the retention of jobs are. Our home office and our corporate office is in Rock Island, Illinois. We're a bordering community. And it's painful to watch the moving trucks cross that Mississippi River over to Iowa. So the retention of jobs, as well as with indirect and construction jobs, with a total of just over 4,700 jobs. And these are quality jobs that have great benefits. And that is the basis of why we continue to burn the midnight oil, just as you do in your communities, to have a positive impact on economic development. Next slide, please. All right, so as Courtney has identified, our impact to date, 241 million with 842 in total project costs, and 84% of those jobs that were created supported accessible to low-income individuals with a decent increase. So here's what I'll also tell you: the characteristics of the new market tax credit program changes every year. I'm humbled by each closing that we make. I feel just about how much more I need to learn. So if I can tell you after $241 million that I find something else I wished I would have known in every transaction, don't let the process intimidate you. Be bold and strong, and know that at least what you do know is it brings about 20% to 30% equity. And as long as you know that, then we're off to a great start. All right. So the projects that we have financed are severely distressed census tracts, and we're going to get into that a little bit. We've mapped 6 counties in your area. I'm always going to say, if you have a question, and you'll see this at the end, reach out to us because it is a bit complicated. And just because it's in an eligible census tract or versus a severely distressed, there are opportunities where we can self-distress it. So some of that criteria within the national norms, of course, bankruptcy rates, low wage with a higher percentage of that job pool, access to capital is up to 17.6% or lower, and food insecurity rates. We really look at healthy food initiatives, and that's very important to us as well. Next slide, please. So one of the reasons that I was excited about making the presentation today when I met Courtney last November is you see a significant amount of an investment that is in Northwestern Illinois. And we want to make sure that we're bringing the same opportunity to you and your communities. We like partnerships. We certainly cannot do it all ourselves, nor is that the proper approach. But we're very interested in seeing what we can do to get a cluster of these little circles closer to Effingham and their surrounding communities. So 104 million just in the new market tax credits, as well as a significant amount of additional private sector investment. You can see as we continue with the breakdown in the slide, the main intent of this slide again is to show what we want to do to increase that and whatever we can do to help grow your economy locally. Next slide. We were very proud to be a part of Flex and Gate. I think you would be the best testimonials to know what this meant for Effingham. The 311 jobs, we did contribute $10 million of our federal allocation. The overall project was $37 million. And it's all about jobs, and you'll notice there with the hourly wage. One of the things that we look at is not just the hourly wage, we also look at the additional benefit packages that is a requirement of each hiring. Each one of these transactions enter into a community benefit agreement that basically says, establishes what the benchmarks are, the expected return on investment, and sets the baseline for what we monitor over the 7 years, and these are where their commitments. We really look at the human empowerment component in each transaction that we fund. Next slide. Hill and Valley, J&J Snacks. This was an entity that was going to relocate out of Rock Island. We were able to provide $16 million, highly distressed census tract. And again, the focus was what can we do to retain our businesses within the state of Illinois, as well as to enhance and grow the businesses, and 137 new jobs that were created. Next slide, please. McLaughlin Body. We worked very closely on this one. They did not have a consultant, so we somewhat filled that role. This was very important to us because once again, we were at risk of this entity moving to South Carolina. And I'm sure South Carolina is a little bit nicer in the winter months, but we're here about Illinois and keeping Illinois jobs local. So 50 new jobs added to its 175 existing employee base. They bought the building, made significant improvements. And then within the community benefit agreement, because it's literally right down the road from our office here, there was a homebuyer education component, financial education component, in which we provided a series of 7 presentations on an in-service day. But they also made a contribution that we pooled with our existing homebuyers assistance program through employer-assisted housing to help their new employees purchase a home. And we feel that that's another component when a business is having the direct access of a federal tax credit that they continue to give back to their communities. And we see that that model works very well. Next slide. East Moline Expo, the Bend. This is one where the project was well on its way, and I'm sure not unique to many of the transactions and businesses that you're dealing with, where we get down to the finishing line and we find that we have an additional gap that we didn't anticipate, which puts the closing at risk. In this instance, that's exactly what happened. At the last minute, they did find that they had an additional gap, and we were able to step in with a $3 million federal allocation, which has been a significant catalyst for additional investment along distressed area of our riverfront and formal industrial site. Next slide, please. Green Current Technologies. This is a role where we're able to facilitate $20 million. I'm not so sure if you all know Chad Pagracki and Tammy with Living Lands and Waters. They're known for the last 20 years cleaning up various riverfronts, rivers. So this project, recycling plastics, we know and have seen what takes place with plastic bottles and other plastics floating in our waterways. This is designed to make pallets, again, really reaching out to our most vulnerable population with new jobs, those 46 jobs, and ongoing support for home ownership as well as financial education. Next slide, please. On-call imaging, one of our most recent closings, $5 million to provide medical diagnostic and imaging center, where previously folks had to drive about 40 miles to have access to these services. This is a smaller impact, but still very important if you're one of those individuals that no longer have to drive 40 miles. In partnership with OSF, you see the direct impact that's there. This gives you some example of a smaller project that still has a significant impact for the communities in which they serve. Next project, please, or next slide. Halo Brand Solutions, we've actually closed 2 transactions in Sterling, Illinois. The first one unwound about 2 weeks ago, which is at the end of the 7-year compliance. And then the second closing to continue to facilitate and grow and assist with growing their business. Again, 244 new jobs created and 263 retained. Next slide, please. Chem Processing. This was a $2.2 million, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we get into some of the basics of a new market tax credit program. But this is a loan pool structure. And from a sizing to make sure that the qualifying business receives the greatest benefit, usually $5 million is a threshold, but not every transaction is a $5 million deal. So in this instance, a $2.2 million assistance was provided in a loan pool structure that continues to provide significant capital and growth. Next slide, please. This one in Ottawa, Illinois. Here's where we had the benefit of the federal allocation as well as the state of Illinois, the market tax credit program, for a total of just under $24 million. Again, a real catalyst for additional investment, meeting the community needs along the city's riverfront and downtown corridor. Jobs created and retained are not as high as such as the Halo example, but in this instance, what the compelling story is, and you're going to hear this throughout my presentation, is we need to make sure we're telling our compelling story as we represent our communities, that they serve over 7,500 individuals individually served. Next slide, please. Dot Foods, this was our first transaction in a small community of 2,500 people in Mount Sterling, Illinois. And this was really an eye-opener for us, realizing the direct impact that we can have, and through the community benefit agreement with opening a store in their downtown. It was a significant expansion of their facility, and they chose to stay in their home community versus moving to a larger urban area. And it, again, just very committed to their community. And it takes individuals just as you that are participating on this webinar to make investment like this happen. Next slide. All right. So why would I put up a slide that says 2011 with an ineligible map? Because we're in transition. Next slide. So what I want you to know is this, again, at the end of this, you're going to say, if you have a question, not only through the questions through the webinar itself, but don't hesitate to reach out to us. Effective August this year, we will convert from 2011 to 2015 mapping and census data to 2016-20. And here's an example of a community that was not distressed by before, that was no longer that would not have been eligible for new market tax credits, and now it is. And I'm going to give a little bit of an example of the redevelopment efforts that we're doing there. Next slide, please. If you're not familiar with the Shimer campus, it was one of the first women colleges in the United States that was established in the 1860s. There was a fire shortly thereafter in around 1900. You see the overview of these massive Georgian-style brick with columns, towers, indoor theaters, pool, gym, that unfortunately was abandoned in the 1960s. There was a Campbell Center that was housed there that really focused more on arts, and it had been vacated from them, and they approached us about redeveloping it. Next slide. So this is a breakdown. I'm happy to tell you that in February, we closed on the first phase that blends in well with multiple efforts in the redevelopment. It was approximately $35 million are going in to invest a previous campus in a community of around 1,500 individuals. Next slide, please. So within this, the former president's home is our resource center, which also incorporates a shared co-working space. Fortunately, we did receive some Rebuild Illinois dollars. And also, we pair that, if you go on to, apologize, to the next slide, a breakdown of what the various activities that are there. We know in some of our rural communities, we need to be able to provide amenities. We feel that in the housing development component, that the additional amenities are very important. One of the reasons that we included this in the slide and in presentation is we want to get you to start thinking about other opportunities that may be eligible for new market tax credits. And if it wasn't previously, now it would be. Next slide, please. So with a comprehensive reinvestment of this campus, we also realized how important early child care development is. We will be hosting a groundbreaking in June for the center that you see there. We have a pending request also to have a after-school care program. So next slide. All right, now we're going to start diving in a little bit more about our entity as well as the new market tax credit program. So here we go. Are you ready? All right, so we are headquartered in Illinois. We are a national entity. However, Illinois is our home, and it's very important to us that we allocate and work very closely with our Illinois communities to bring as much capital as we can. While we will look at urban transactions, our heart and souls are really in non-metro areas and similar to the audience that we have today. Next slide. So what are we looking at that really that fits within our mission as well as our priorities? You're going to hear over and over again, quality, accessible, and job creation. Critical needed community services, healthcare and youth services, and affordable housing access. Workforce housing, and what we find through our development side, and we've been developing affordable housing now for about 40 years, is that under workforce housing, it is housing that is developed that anyone of any income range can live in. Some of the units do come with an income restriction. We'll talk about that under the new market side and its requirements, but it also has a market rate component there as well. On our priorities, industrial manufacturing, critical asset hospitals, and federally qualified healthcare facilities, at-risk youth facilities, food deserts, as well as mixed-use developments. And we have a couple case studies that we'll go over with those here shortly. So next slide, please. All right. So as indicated in Courtney's introduction, we have been very fortunate to receive 6 consecutive allocations for a total of $220 million in federal allocation. When we look at the 37 projects that we have closed, you see the breakdown between the number of jobs that were created and that quality job that meets a certain threshold of a per hourly wage that's well above the poverty rate, with benefits, as I've indicated. And then the accessible jobs. What do we mean by accessible? That those that of lower income have had an opportunity to work here at a significant increase in their hourly wages. So 83% of the jobs that have been created, we have seen empowerment through that hourly wage and increase, thus creating additional disposable income to help grow some of the smaller economic development activities that pair very well under the flagship of Main Street, Illinois. 78,000 low-income individuals served, and that's very important. And obviously those numbers are highly impacted by healthcare and education. Next slide. So what are new market tax credits? They're designed to stimulate commercial investment in low-income communities. It was created in the year 2000 under the Clinton administration. It has bipartisan support and is a significant factor in attracting private capital to communities. The program's administered by the Treasury Department, the CDFI fund, which again, those public-private partnerships through community development entities. That is a designation and a certification that is required to be able to apply for an allocation of new market tax credits. And these allocations are projects that are really looking at gap capital. As I indicated, 20 to 30% based on a federal and state allocation that really looks to support business startups, expansion, commercial development, and community facilities and housing and mixed use projects. So what is, next slide, please. So what is a low-income community? It's based on census data. We've talked about the mapping changes, and you'll see those as we get into the maps of the 6 counties that you represent. So qualifying higher distressed, it includes unemployment, brownfields area, state enterprise, and other state and local designated stressed areas, underserved, food deserts, hub zones, among others. And we're going to look at the highly distressed versus distressed. If you get really creative and want to dive into the mapping world and you enjoy really looking at data, you can certainly find these mapping tools at the cdfifund.gov. Next slide, please. So how many CDEs are currently serving Illinois? I think that's very important because you'll see me break for an infomercial about advocacy and talking to our elected officials regarding some pending legislation. But there's approximately 10 CDEs that are based out of Illinois that have received allocation in the last 5 years. And many more national entities serve Illinois. And that's significant. And again, we are so fortunate that through the Department of Commerce that we have a state new market tax credit program. And one of the creative components of that state program is that it requires a dollar for dollar match. And so since we are not one of the underserved states that's identified by the Treasury Department, having access to a state credit will get other national CDEs that may not consider making an investment in the state of Illinois take a second look at it. And I don't want to minimize the importance of what that is. So don't get hung up that we're not identified as an underserved state. We have a state credit that makes us very competitive to help telling our compelling story. So CDEs come in a variety of form. Ours is a for-profit, but it's controlled by a minority nonprofit, and that's significant from a competitiveness as well as the mission that we have. They can also be an affiliate of a municipality. The city of Fort Wayne, Indiana, for example, has its own community development entity that serves strictly the city of Fort Wayne, and we've partnered with them and very qualified individuals that are committed to their community as well. An affiliate of a bank, that really is that make great partners because in commitment and serving to reach the community reinvestment goal, they also in many times will be that leveraged lender as well as an equity investor, and then nonprofit and for-profit entities that have a similar mission. CDEs have a defined geographic area. We are national. We have 7 primary states that we have identified. You'll see Illinois is identified as number 1. Whenever we are at national conventions and various other coalitions, anyone we talk to, they know we're proudly from the state of Illinois, and we are here to serve Illinois with as much capital as we possibly can. However, you see the other states that we do business in, and they're identified there. So the underserved states, just as a matter of reference, you see them identified. I'm not going to list them every year, or excuse me, list them here. They do change every year somewhat, but you can see if the underserved states, which are a priority from the CDFI fund, that are identified there, why that state credit that we have in Illinois is so important to access and be competitive on a national level. CDEs or community development entities can be found using the search engine with the cdfifund.gov. Next slide. So legislatively, 2020 legislation extended the program for another 5 years. It is set to sunset here shortly in 2025. It does have bipartisan support. There is a pending Senate Bill 234 and House Bill 2539, which is part of the New Market Tax Credit Extension Act of 2023 that we are advocating very aggressively for permanency. Why is permanency so important beyond just what you would just instantly think? As you know from your own personal experiences, many development and redevelopment efforts take a few years to get going, correct? You'll see in one of our case studies here that it took 10 years. If there's not permanency in the program, how can you effectively market and compete on a global basis to bring that new employer to your community if for 3 to 4 years you're talking to them about access to a credit and then it's no longer there? The kiss of death is to tell anyone you're out of funds, correct? And this is one of the major components, and we do have bipartisan support. Again, as you're meeting with your elected officials on a federal basis, please comment about how important for the permanency of the New Market Tax Credit Extension Act of 2023, again, Senate Bill 234, House Bill 2539. And I would really appreciate your support in that effort. Next slide, please. So economic benefit to the recipient. So, you know, we live in a world of acronyms, QLICBs. What the heck is a QLICB, right? Qualified low-income business. But really what you'll look at is the overall benefit to the recipient is tied to making sure that the community that's receiving the benefit also has representation from that community. So we do have an advisory board that has to approve each transaction that we bring to them so that underserved communities and communities of color are well represented within each and every transaction that we commit to. So what can it be used for? Capital to fund projects, business expansion, debt refinancing. They're monetized to bring that additional capital. And I think one of the significant components, certainly even more so in a post-COVID world, is being able to have access to working capital. As you meet with your businesses and they are signing contracts and their business is growing, access to working capital is significant to help stabilize. It also, if you're that lender that's providing that leveraged loan that may or may not be secured by real estate, knowing that that business over that 7-year period has a significant amount of working capital into its structure, what happens? Less risk, okay? It is a low cost of capital, flexible terms, including longer amortizations and higher loan to values with below market interest rates. And you're saying, hey, you're talking it's equity, but now you're talking interest rates and loans. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, capitalizing on the leverage model. Your walk away from that is knowing that it's all designed to ensure that the greatest benefit and the amount of money that comes to that qualifying business is achieved. So at the end of the 7-year compliance period, a significant portion of that benefit is converted to equity. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so here's some of the brain fog that will come out as you dive deep into this, and why I want you, for disclosure purposes, understanding what the benefits are, but I also want to talk to you about 2 different structures here, all right? So first of all, there's a tax credit buyer that monetizes that credit. This is a 7-year credit period. It's a 39% credit that in the first 3 years, the investor earns 5%, 4 to 7, 6%. So under the leverage model that allows that 39% credit to be earned on a greater basis, this is broken down in an A note and a B note. Starting to get exciting, isn't it? This conversation, all right? But here's what I'd like for you to understand from this. In order for the business to have the greatest benefit of cash, what happens is for that 7-year period, it is a loan. You are paying interest at a below market interest rate, interest only, basically to yourself for the 7-year period. And at its exit, at the end of the 7-year, it's converted to equity because you buy that note for $1,000. That is the leveraged model. All right. So it's interest only below market for the 7-year period. And in a $10 million example, with a $2.2 million net benefit, you're buying that $2.2 million note back from yourself at the unwind for $1,000. All right. So what is the current equity raise? It's a very unique time in our capital markets. And I understand, and maybe it's just because I've been around a long time, don't be discouraged because of some of the challenges that are taking place, whether it's in historic tax credits, Section 42 tax credits, or any form of investment. One thing that history has taught us is that we figure out a way and we get through it. So because there are some instabilities at different points and struggles, whether it's within the insurance world or in the equity investment or reduced pay-in schedules, don't be discouraged by that. We've been in this industry for some time, and we know we always figure out a way to make it happen. So currently, the investment rate, we're seeing between 76 and 81 cents per dollar. If there is a community reinvestment appetite, you may see that equity raise if that lender has a need within your target markets. That you may see it go as high as 83 cents, but that is very specific. That is location-based and relationship-based, that you may have that relationship with that investor lender and may not even be aware of it. It may provide source debt for the leverage lender, no economic interest in the qualifying business, and main concern is to avoid recapture. That's a really nice way of saying there's a lot of compliance with this, but we're all here to help make sure that you don't fall out of compliance, and we are part of a solution. Instead of the gotcha with a finger pointed at you, it's two open hands holding you saying, we gotcha. All right. So don't be intimidated by the process. We all have the same goals. We're here to make sure that you are successful, whether it's us as a CDE or any other CDE that you're working with. All right. Now for the next slide. Doesn't that look exciting? There is a variety of structures on how this all flows back into the qualifying business. And we're not going to get too hung up on this. Just know that with good accounting firms and good legal firms that specialize in this industry, and this is a small community of accountants and lawyers that work in this, this is what they're all tracking to make sure there's no risk of non-compliance. But at the end of the day, even though you see all of these boxes with labels and acronyms on them, focus on that qualified low-income business that is called the borrower. The net benefit by structure of how this takes place is so that the project sponsor and that the borrower is the direct benefit of the tax credit itself. Okay, So when you see, and then as you're going to other conferences or other webinars or just in any type of presentation, put your eyes right down to the sponsor and the business and the borrower to make sure that however it gets through whatever fund, know that this all takes place within 1 day and approximately 35 wires to make sure that the borrower gets the direct benefit. Next slide, please. So here's an example. After 40 years in this industry, surprise, I need to keep things simple. So we're going to work with a $10 million allocation with that rate of 39%, generates $3.9 million worth of credit. Present value of money combined with the estimated closing cost and legal fees, the net benefit is about $2.2 million or 22%. That's why I led in with the statement that the net benefit is approximately 20%. If you work with that, if you get an extra 2% at your closing, that's the nice surprise. Don't go into it expecting 22% and then being disappointed at 20%. Look at 20%. And then based on equity raises, when it's paired with the state credit, you can add approximately another 10%. And that's a significant amount of equity. If you're a lender and you're the leverage lender, knowing that approximately 30% of equity is coming into the transaction, plus the qualifying business minimum threshold of 5%, you're starting to see that from a risk management perspective in a commercial transaction, that leveraged lender and our partner lender is coming in at about 65%. So if you're looking at risk management at 65%, and this business that is expanding has a significant amount of working capital, I think you can see how this all leads to additional success. Next slide, please. All right, geographical restrictions. We're going to get into a little bit of the mapping. For technical assistance, at least 50% of the gross income is derived from the business activity located there. So what does that mean? What if it's a trucking company that has its business in Effingham, but it's got trucks driving all over the country? How does that fit? At least 50% of the gross income needs to come from its office or that its address that's in a low income census tract. Over 40% of the tangible property of the business is located in a low income community. How I would look at that is that you have an opportunity that even if 60% isn't located, you still qualify for the credit, but that's the base mark of 40%. And then 40% of the services are provided by the employees are in that low income community. Again, that allows you that flexibility that really helps promote and bring new businesses to your community. It's not so rigid or structured that it's an impediment to enticing that business to come into your counties and cities there. And must not have more than 5% in either collectibles or non-qualifying financial assets. If you really want to get into that, let's talk about that more on an individual project specific basis. All right, next slide, please. Okay, qualifying business or development. We're going to look at one of our case studies is the Center at 501, which is the former Methodist church that had been vacant downtown Springfield, Illinois, approximately 4 blocks for the Capitol. Mixed use is permitted as long as 20% of the rental income is derived from the commercial tenants. You're going to see 80-20 rules. So that means 80% needs to come from the housing side. Let's talk about income restrictions. 20% of the units are reserved for those earning up to 80% the area median income. 80% are market rate. So when you're looking at a mixed use that does involve residential, just know there's an 80-20 test. Straight acquisition, refinance, rental property must have at least a substantial rehab of 25% of acquisition in the basis or be owner occupied. One of the benefits that came out of COVID was the look back. So what do I mean by a look back? Prior to COVID, any investment that was made within a 12-month period, you could look back and that was eligible into the basis for that 39% credit. Post-COVID, it's 24 months. So if someone is growing, a business is growing for 24 months, whatever investment has been made is eligible for the look back into the investment. Now, there is a cliff. 24 months and 1 day, that cliff is 24 months. That is why timing is so important. Unfortunately, if a closing is delayed, part of that basis can fall out, and we have seen that. So that's why in this industry, if you hear, oh, that closing was so difficult, you know, we were up half the night for a week trying to get this closing done. It may have been that that qualifying business was at risk of having $500,000 of eligible basis drop off. So time is money. So businesses that are not eligible, I think they're pretty straightforward. Racetracks, gambling facilities, golf courses, country clubs, liquor store, farming, massage and tanning businesses, and undeveloped land holding or land banking. Okay, next slide. So let's look at a little bit of distress criteria for Clark, Coles, Crawford, Edgar, Effingham, and Moultrie counties. So the first one is Clark County. Next slide, please. So you'll see the data that is there. It's as far as eligibility, you'll see that green is a smaller area. That gives you, again, some concept consistent with my comments throughout this presentation. Don't get too hung up in understanding mapping and going through it. You know, if that's something you want to do, certainly please do. But if you have a specific question, please reach out to us because, again, we're in transition with 2011, 2015 versus 2020 data. And if it doesn't quite fit, as you'll see here in the upcoming slides, we want to do everything we can to make it fit because we are mission driven and sometimes we may have to look a little bit outside the box to make that work. Next slide to Coles County. So here is the 2016-2020 data. What is severely distressed, you'll see that the percentage of people in poverty and the track income as percentage of area median income and the unemployment rate, eligibility. We look at these three criterias, and when we look at self-distressing and what those opportunities are, any one of these three categories, if it doesn't meet the threshold, we can self-distress by doing so. It is a process, but not one that's intimidating. We just want to make sure we're all on the same page when doing so. Next slide to Crawford County. So here you see a little bit more that is in the eligibility through the 2016-2020 data. The percentage of people in poverty, the area median income at 60%, that's a threshold between eligible and severely distressed, and the unemployment rate at 4.4%. Next slide to Edgar County. Again, you see a much larger area within distressed and severely distressed. And we look at that unemployment rate at 7.8%. That's one of the criterias, the percentage of poverty and the percentage of area median income. That would be an area where we would be looking at if the project was literally across the street of eligible versus severely distressed. That would certainly from our perspective be reason to dive a little bit deeper and try to make it work within the parameters of the program. Next slide to Effingham County. Here's a breakdown of the distressed. You see the percentage of poverty and the area median income. The unemployment rate is significantly less. However, the other two areas certainly make it qualified, and then we can get into other needs and what type of business it is. If it's in a food desert or if there's a lack of service to quality health care, these all become part of that compelling story. Next slide, Moultrie County. Not as much here, but that doesn't mean it's not eligible for other incentives. So again, as I led in with, we're here to help do what we can to partner with you to bring economic development and other resources to your community. Let's take a look at these and see what we can possibly do. So next slide, please. So mapping your project, we talked about a little bit, and you could see by the colors, those gray census tracts were unqualified, but eligible for other programs. And Illinois certainly has a significant amount of programs through not only the Illinois Housing Development Authority, but the Department of Commerce, and making access to resources to help grow your businesses. The dark green were qualified, where at least the poverty rate was at least 20% and the median income of 80% or less. But that light green is the real kicker here for severely distressed. And while qualified for the program is one thing, I would venture to say, similar to our CDE with Central States, that we commit to the Treasury Department that we will close all of our transactions in severely distressed census tracts. So those qualifying areas, and why I want to slow down a bit here is just to understand, if it's in qualified, don't give up, because the opportunity to self-distress it, if any one of these three categories are met, that the poverty rate is greater than 30%, the median family income of 60% or less, or the unemployment rate is at least 1.5 times the national average. Now, that was significantly less in 2011, 2015, or it was higher rather than what it is in the previous 26, 2010, 2011, 2015, and it's a little bit less for 2020. Those are going to be project specific questions that I'm happy to review with you, or any other CDE, or perhaps a consultant that your business may be working with. So just if at first it doesn't appear it's eligible, don't give up. Let's have a conversation about it, and and see what other resources are available, or if it can be self-distress. Next slide. So let's look at some case studies. The Center at 501, next slide, please. This was a very catalytic product here in Springfield, not only because it had been vacant for a significant amount of time, but due to its location to the capital. It's a great opportunity for us to promote both federal and state historic tax credits, as well as the state new market tax credit program. So a $9.4 million project, that $2.7 million were provided in tax credit equity. You see also the federal historic tax credit, and then the Illinois Housing Development Authority state donation tax credit. One of the most significant tools we have that is unique to the state of Illinois, and that is the state donation tax credit. And while I know the purpose of this webinar is to talk about new markets, if I don't do a shout out for the state credit with a brief explanation to know that you may be leaving money on the table in your communities, this is a tremendous tool. So the state donation tax credit is designed to bring capital to a transaction. So whether it's donated property, it's cash, a discounted sale, if it's a TIF agreement from the municipality, it's eligible for a 50-cent on the dollar tax credit. And as you can see in this structure, that's almost $1.3 million in equity and cash to the transaction. So the walk away from this case study is a $9.4 million transaction, has a $1.6 million loan. If you're underwriting from risk with a capital stack such as this, you see that a $1.6 million loan against a $9 million development, these are good investments, okay? In addition to all the benefits that are known, a vacant building, adaptive reuse, blight turned into bringing more foot traffic to a downtown. Next slide, please. It was significant enough that Senator Durbin came to the ribbon cutting. The individual that he is standing with is someone that sold the building at a discount to take advantage of that state donation tax credit. And of course, it did receive an award in 2020 from downtown Springfield. Some of you may recognize some faces there. Next slide, please. The Wilson Building. This project was $10 million, or excuse me, 10 years in the making. Conversations you don't want to have. Shortly after we took title to the building, received a phone call from the fire marshal that said, your building was just struck with lightning and that terracotta tile on the front is falling off like icing on a wedding cake. What's the walk away from this? Don't freak out. Just don't freak out. So fast forwarding, here's where we are. $15 million project. New markets provided a significant amount of over $3 million. Of course, we had state and federal and some brownfield credits in there. This was a mixed use that has housing on the upper floors, as well as a retail and kitchen incubators on the first floor. We've been working within incubators now for well over 10 years, and we have found that to grow businesses and to bring lights on to those downtown empty storefronts by incubating these businesses and they move on into another storefront, it's a great economic tool. So this one, 10 years to closing, of great success for us and a catalyst investment in Clinton, Iowa. Next slide, please. All right, seeking out new market tax credits. Create a compelling story. Participating in a webinar such as you've had today that I hope sparks enough interest that it will get you thinking about what are those pipeline projects that you're working on and could it possibly fit into this. But that compelling story. Finding a community development entity that aligns with your business. That's very important. And then demonstrate the but-for test. Readiness to proceed. You know, we're also developers, so I'm making this comment right back at me. If you ask a developer if they're ready to go, they're ready to close in 30, 60 days. That's our standard answer, right? And we know the reality is it's not. You know, is it 6 months to 9 months? Probably. But we really want to look at being cautious, having our compelling story, but telling it over and over again, over 3 to 4 years, it becomes aged. And what we don't want to do is have a project that is a great project, but to have deal fatigue. Oh yeah, they've been talking about that transaction for years. Obviously, nobody's not going to fund it. No, that's not always the case. But we want to be proactive in making sure that's not how we're branded. So it's okay to say, hey, we want to start talking to you about our project. It's not ready for a couple of years. We'd like for it to be ready tomorrow, but we're just putting you on notice. You know, we don't want you to be carving out a portion of allocation for it this year, only for us to tell you we're not ready. Set up realistic expectations because the last thing you want to do is to get deal fatigue. All right, next slide. I'm not going to go through each of these polling questions or categories or necessarily their answers. Go ahead, next slide. But these are going to be very important as a follow-up today. By answering these questions, it will allow us with the information to best meet the needs coming from you. I don't live in your community. I am a guest there. I don't know what is best for your community. I need to hear from you what you feel your community needs so I can best assist you, or to know if it's something I can't do at all. I don't want to waste your time. So how do you find out about programs, events? Obviously, by being a member of the Business Navigator Alliance is one significant component. But how do you find out about programs? Next slide. And then pick the most important item from the list below as being the most significant need in your community at this time. Again, please take the time. If you care about your community, invest this minimal amount of time so that we can be a part of that strategic plan in making and helping to get these needs met. Next slide, please. What resources, support, and programs are missing that you would like to see from the state or local government? Choose the most important. You can see what's identified there. If you see something that is not listed, add it. All right. We try to think of what we can. If you have any questions, I'm sure Courtney can help you with some of this. Next question. How are you funding your business and capital needs now? Look at this as a replacement to family friend resources, okay? But I think by now you're starting to see what we're attempting to accomplish here. Next polling question. Has your community, how has your community most been impacted? Really look at this in a post-COVID world. We know that our workforce base is struggling, and certainly within our hospitality venues, but certainly take some time to take a look at these. Next slide. Project identification. What project or business are you currently considering that needs a subsidy, and what is driving that need? Typically, lack to access to capital, or meeting that capital that your first mortgage or your leveraged lender is telling you what you need. And those are areas we can help with. Next slide. Because we are a community-based entity that looks at addressing all of community needs, we are also, next slide, please. In summary, we're looking at where can we assist? When we come to a community, we bring all that we are. By management agreement, we're also a nonprofit community development financial institution that pairs itself really well with unfunded TIFs or Main Street communities or reimbursements on facade programs. So there's a need there, and there's other opportunities that we can partner with meeting those financial needs. So what does your community need? Housing, access to capital, you see those identified there. And then we'll be coordinating this with Courtney on how to get that information to us, whether Beth or Heather from our office will help coordinate this so that we can also issue a report. Once we receive these questions, next slide, please. Or once we see the answer to the questions, rather, we'll issue a report to Courtney that I'm sure that he will distribute as far as what we heard. And if we missed something, certainly please let us know. So I trust you found the information beneficial and then presented in a timely manner. So thus concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you, Brian. Wow, info-packed presentation. I loved it. Thank you. First and foremost, thank you for educating us on somewhat of a complicated program, especially as the first time you've ever heard of New Markets tax credits. Loved hearing that you guys not only pay attention to job creation in these projects, but about the retention. I'm a huge advocate for business retention expansion, and I think something that we definitely need to be mindful of and work for throughout our communities. But what a lovely presentation. You ran through a lot of information for us. We did bust our 1 hour time frame. We're going to continue on. We have a lot of questions that have come in. We've got some in the chat. I've had some people text me questions. I've got some myself. We're going to try to get through as many as possible. In the chat, there's been a lot of questions towards, is the presentation going to be made available? And we will provide a copy of the recording and a copy of the slides as well. These will go out next week. So if you've attended our webinars before, you're aware of this. If you registered today, you'll get a copy next week. You'll get a follow-up email next week with a copy of the slides, with a copy or with a link to the recorded webinar. And the recorded webinar will also be on the website at ilbusinessnavigators.com. We have it on our YouTube channel for the F&M Regional Growth Alliance. So definitely something to be able to go back and dive into some of the things that Brian spoke about today, that he educated us on today. There again, very thankful for the opportunity to have this discussion. We're going to go ahead and dive into the questions. One of the first questions that came in today on the chat was about a neighboring community, Fayette County. And I believe that you had noted this through the presentation, but it came in at the point of discussing, the areas that you are mapping for us today, which would be the participating communities that are with the Illinois Business Navigator Alliance. So for Fayette County, where could they look to see the distressed areas, or can you note to that these are available throughout the state as a whole, and just kind of elaborate?
Sure. If you go to the CDFI fund, their website, and look at a mapping tool, we're happy to map it and send it to you as well, with a breakdown. But certainly that's available, as well as Baker Tilly has a website, Cone Resnick has a website, Novogradac has a website, or just go to the CDFI fund and look up NMTC mapping tool.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And we'll, with the follow-up, we'll try to send out some of those links as well, and any prominent information that helps to provide supported some preliminary information to this. So the first question that we always ask, Brian, is how does somebody get started? I mean, if you're interested, you think that your project may be eligible, or this may be a good fit. Again, new market tax credits is another tool in the tool belt, something to definitely come and assist potentially from a gap standpoint, or trying to make a project more financially feasible. Where do they get started? Just call you, or what's the best way to get started?
Well, consider yourself started by participating in this webinar. The fact that you stuck through that entire presentation says that you had the fortitude to withstand the process, I would say. But I think this is a good start. If you have a project that you would like to review, just reach out to us. We're more than happy to walk you through whether it fits with ours, whether it's our CDE, not only myself. In fact, I did notice that one of my board members who's was on the call as well and serves on advisory boards, but we also have access beyond just our own CDE. So today you got started. How's that? And of course, answering those questions.
I love it. I love it. Love it. And love the little bonus that you threw to us today, discussing IDA's state donation tax credit, and definitely a lot of services that you guys can offer beyond new market tax credits. So appreciate the opportunity to even educating us further and beyond what the topic today and what we asked you to discuss today. And I love the case studies. Definitely a testimonial to how this could happen, how this could work, and just the variety, the wide variety of projects that this is applicable to. So thank you kindly for reviewing all that information with us. We had a question come in, and there's one in the chat as well, and I'm going to kind of combine the two of them, and I think very prominent to one that came in was, at what level is this a good fit? And talking to the size of a project, the needs to make a good sense. And then Mr. Noble in the chat as well is, what is the typical minimum size project to be worth pursuing new market tax credits?
That's a great question. I'm going to say $5 million. However, we are looking at community impact and what the community needs are. But for the financial benefit under the leverage model, $5 million. Under the loan pool structure, all right? And a loan pool structure is different. What the loan pool does is it can make loans as small as $750,000, $1 million, $2 million. We closed one and $3 million recently. It is not an equity structure. You're taking the benefit of the equity to buy down the interest rate. So what that does, it's either a step stool to getting to the $5 million project, but it's a interest-only loan below market and below bank financing for 7 years. So under loan pool, what makes sense in your community will look as low as 750, but under 5 million, the sweet spot on the best benefit or minimum would be 5 million. Now, I got to put a qualifier there. Your project may be $4 million, but you need $1 million of working capital that many times people don't realize. So again, call me, let's talk it through.
I love the emphasis towards the working capital, and you dove into that during the presentation as well. And, you know, sometimes you just try to get to that finish line. We understand that there's no straight line from A to B, but then once something's up and running, it takes a while for cash flow to start coming in, especially heavily dependent on what the product is or the service that you're offering. And having that working capital ensure that you're able to operate, ensures the opportunity to be successful and be a long striving company as well is very significant. So I'm glad you put that emphasis there. Speaking towards loan pool and the 7 years and interest only and below market rates, what interest rates do you typically find or have you seen recently? Understandable, quite a lot of volatility, if you will, with the current climate and what interest rates are at, and who knows what the future is going to do. We all hope for something to come down, but what have you seen recently, or what's typical for a rate for new market tax credits?
We closed one in March at 4.9%.
4.9, and that's the interest
That's
only at
fixed for 7 years. And that
That's
is
amazing.
fixed for 7 years.
That is amazing. And you'd even noted to it, a flexibility in that loan to value and, typical financing, 80% loan to value. You've noted this as gap financing as well. What flexibility is there in that LTV?
I think it's really project specific.
Understood.
Going to look at what need it's filling in your community, how much working capital is needed, and does it make sense?
I like it. I like it. Most certainly. And there again, a tool in the toolbox. So if this is a potentially applicable for you, most certainly worth investigating, diving into more. If it's a good fit, it helps you to push a project forward. It helps you to bring something to the community. Definitely glad that you're here today. Hopefully you've learned a lot. I know that I have, but I think at the end of the day here, anything is just call Mr. Hollenback, call Brian, and start working with them. Brian, you noted federal new market tax credits. You noted state new markets tax credits, and I believe a limited number of states that offer new market tax credits. Is that correct, or is that
Yes.
commonly found?
That is something that I believe we should applaud our elected officials here in the state of Illinois for, and that continuing to keep that program active and really supporting the Department of Commerce for administering such a great program. We're big advocates for it, and I think it's one of the most significant tools we have to avoid Illinois being a flyover zone.
The biggest difference, if you could identify between federal versus state new market tax credits, or is there much of a difference?
Yes. It does come with an additional requirement that it meets a definition of a qualifying business.
Mm-hmm.
For further information, that's a one-on-one conversation with you.
Understood.
And because consistent with any other state credit, that equity may be closer to 55 cents versus 78 to 81. And that's not unique to Illinois. I want to be clear about that.
Okay. Thank you kindly. And during the presentation, you had noted some legislation current for the permanency of this program. I believe if I wrote them down correctly, Senate Bill 234, House Bill 2539. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Awesome.
And if you go onto the New Market Tax Credit Coalition website, you'll learn all you need to know: who has signed on, who hasn't, who we need to be speaking to. And the coalition is just absolutely amazing. Consistent with the CDFI coalition. They're just great national advocates with significant members that help keep people like us and you all informed.
And then are you guys part of that coalition as well?
Oh, yes.
Or just supportive of it?
No, we are.
And then, so we'll work with you after this for that follow-up email to send those links to where people can find that information. And if you've got anything that helps us to digest that Senate Bill 234, if you're taking notes at home, and House Bill 2539 to bring it down to an easy to understand level and even talking points. I definitely understand the importance of trying to have something a little more consistent and the permanency of it, in that nothing happens tomorrow. It's always you're pushing for a project. It always takes longer than what you anticipate, but it's just having that tenacity, that fortitude to keep working on it. And and I concur with you. Nothing kills a project quicker than, oh, this isn't available anymore. And so if this is a potential opportunity for your project, you want to ensure that it is there once you get to the finish line.
Yes.
The additional questions that came in towards health-related services, what qualifies as health-related services?
Certainly a federally qualified healthcare facility is ideal. I would say within the medical industry that's fitting a niche that isn't, or a service that isn't currently available. So it's pretty broad. You know, the Rock Falls example was a digital imaging center.
And it's because that service wasn't available at that time.
Correct. You know, you had to drive 40, 45 miles. So is it dental? Is it, I mean, we could go on and on and on. But it's really pretty broad. It's really to identify and fill a need that isn't currently available for any of your residents that would have to commute to access that service.
Awesome. And you actually answered the second part of that question, which was, would you be able to provide an example of health-related services that do not qualify? And I think with the answer and the understanding that, is it an additional good or service, a new amenity offered throughout the community from a health-related standpoint, and whether that would be eligible or not? Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, and what we're seeing now, certainly in a post-COVID world, is that there's a blend of just your traditional in or outpatient clinic that involves mental health, dental, and pharmaceutical.
It's a wide variety, most certainly.
Yeah, pretty broad.
I love it. Just the potential application for this, and if there's something that it is a potential to, definitely dive into this. Hopefully, you'll review the webinar, you'll review the slides, dig into what Brian has educated us. I mean, over 40 years of experience. Please be a sponge, absorb everything that he's educated us today. That's just the starting point. Reach out to them for additional assistance. Reach out to the Business Navigator Alliance. We'll try to connect you as well. Looking at, you had noted census tracts, and you had noted, you know, potentially there could be a project on the other side of the street of a qualifying area. What happens if you're not in a qualifying area? Is it just telling that story, or what could happen?
Well, that's a subject matter for another webinar when I talk to you about our CDFI and bridge investment. So that's why I said, you know, it's always worth a conversation.
Always worth the conversation. I love it, especially with the transition that you had noted from the 2011 to 2015 going to the 16 to 2020 census data. When will that transition happen, or it's currently happening? Or
Yeah, you're eligible to use both, whichever works to your benefit. After August, it will be limited to the post 2015 mapping tools.
Awesome. And let me check. We've got a lot of thank yous that have come in, and congratulations on to a tremendous webinar and a lot of good info. A lot of people inquiring about the follow-up information. So just to be a little repetitive, we'll send out a copy of the slides, the slide deck. It'll be in PDF format, but you will receive a copy of the slides, and we'll pass out the webinar recording, a link to that, and a follow-up email next week. Those typically go out on Wednesday. In addition, you can find a copy of the recording, download the slides off of our website from ilbusinessnavigators.com. That's navigators with an S, or check us out on YouTube as well. Brian, I was very surprised. I did put a star to it. You had noted 300 hours to do an application. You guys are definitely vested in this process, and just really dive into them with that is not a short amount of time. And just wanted to give a kudos before we jumped off here. We're getting to the 12 o'clock hour, or the 12 o'clock hour, our hard stop. But 300 hours is a significant amount of time to work on an application. And so prior to closing out today, any final comments, any any additional pieces of information you'd like to cover today?
I think the information is there. I just appreciate everyone's time. And please complete those questionnaires so we can do whatever we can to possibly help you or facilitate something through someone else.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. We'll work with you and we'll get those questionnaires out and try to gather information. And, our audience here is definitely stakeholders throughout our communities, throughout South Central, Southeastern Illinois, and try to get good information back to you and have a little heading, have a little direction. Again, heartfelt thank you to Brian and your team for educating us today and really simplifying somewhat of a complicated subject. I know it's easy for you, but definitely the availability to walk us through that, we most certainly appreciate it. And again, thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that today, we're going to close our webinar, maybe even just a minute early. So hope that you join us next month. It's going to be on the Illinois Manufacturing Excellence Center is going to be the topic for next month. Hope that you join us. Again, very fortunate to have Brian Hollenback and his staff with us today. I've had a lot of fun working on this presentation. Really enjoyed listening to it. I'm looking forward to going back and catching the recording, and I've got a ton of chicken scratches. I know everybody else does too. Hope you found it informative, and hope everybody has a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.